Denver's offseason, Wes. I just want to preface all of the possibilities we're going to run through here in a little look ahead by saying I still believe in this team and I still believe in this starting five. And if I'm Calvin Booth, I'm going into the offseason and I'm not panicking. I'm not overreacting. And I'm spending what it takes to keep the group together as priority number one. Now, other opportunities can come along. Their hand could be forced with one member of that starting five who we will get to right away. But they lost to a team that was healthier, more confident, and deeper than them. Shit happens. That's kind of my top line view of where Denver's at right now. I don't think this is an emergency situation.
Yeah, I'm glad we agree on this. Calvin Booth, before the season, telling Kevin O'Connor from The Ringer in a feature that he wrote that, hey, if we don't go back-to-back, it's not the end of the world. We're looking to win multiple championships over this half-decade plus kind of thing, and if we never win back-to-back, the way the Spurs never won back-to-back, that's okay. Like, we still think we can establish a dynasty in that way, and you heard even Michael Malone reflect those same things in his post-game press conference after their Game 7 loss to Minnesota. So everything's going as planned, essentially. Like, you didn't plan to win back-to-back, and guess what? You didn't. So good for you, I guess. But I'm with you also. Look, most people are going to say, well, Denver lost because they didn't have depth, and Minnesota did. And that's partially true, but it's not as true as some people are making it out to be. At the end of the day, your starting five needed to be better. And Denver's starting five, which has been the best starting five in basketball for a couple of years now, was not that in the playoffs and certainly wasn't that against the Timberwolves. And if your starting five is just better, which at the end of the day, that's what wins you championships, right? Like Bruce Brown, Jeff Green are great. The starting five is what wins you a championship. And so if your starting five is better, then you're better. And it was still a 7-game series. And they still led 20 in Game 7. It's not.
And it still took a Naz Reid explosion in the final 2 minutes to turn that game. Exactly. It's not even like it was some kind of blowout. You were up 20, you were up 11 at half. But
that said, I think there's still team needs. I think that there's if you, it would also be a little bit malpractice to just run it back and not make some tweaks on the fringes. Like, you should probably do something after losing in the second round, especially when it feels like the league has caught up to you a little bit here. So you've got to do something to move the needle. But you mentioned Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, or alluded to him. Yeah. He's probably going to opt out of a $15 million contract, even though we don't know that for certain. But if he does opt out, that's basically priority number one for Denver, is trying to bring him back, I would imagine.
Yeah, he is $15.4 million. I think there will be a market for him bigger than that. Philly's the obvious one, but
yeah,
he fits everywhere. I mean, he's the quintessential kind of 3-and-D smaller wing guy that you can slot in anywhere. He shot 33% from deep in the playoffs, 37% somehow in that Minnesota series, which feels like a misprint, but somehow it's true. It just felt like that weapon, and he would be such a big part of their biggest runs. He's great at the, sprint and stop, catch and shoot threes in transition when they would really get rolling last year. When he's making those shots, he has his own two-man chemistry as a screener and a dribble handoff option with Jokic. It just felt like that was stamped out, even though apparently, I guess, again, he shot 37% against Minnesota. So him being better and sticking around, like that literally could be the difference between us feeling better in May of next year about him. That said, they're not that far from the tax. I mean, that the second apron, I should say, which is, I think, going to be the restraint they have, and something, again, that could force their hand if they have to match an offer for KCP that's a substantial raise on what he has now. Do they have to get rid of other players, and what kind of position does that put them in, and are they getting worse just to keep him? I think that's why that first domino is going to be so big. But if we just assume they're able to keep him without sacrificing the best young guys they have, Wes, what do you feel like is the main place they do need to upgrade to get better, get deeper, get in a better position to win that second championship?
Yeah, I don't think it's crazy. You need to figure out what you're going to get with backup center. Can you convince some sort of veteran to come take the minimum and be willing to come off the bench for Jokic for 15 minutes a game in the regular season and maybe 4 or 5 minutes a game in the postseason until you just don't anymore. And that's the tough spot, right? Like, I don't know how many veteran centers are signing up for that unless they want to, chase a ring. And in that case, hey, really great kind of carved out role for you. But they need to figure that out. And there's a bunch, there's always minimum guys centers out there, and they've tried the DeAndre Jordans and things like that, but they gotta find an answer to that problem. And the other thing too is I think they need to go find some wing stopper. Sounds like that's not going to happen at the minimum. That's essentially what they got with Holiday this year, is sort of a wing-ish, stopper-ish kind of guy. But maybe find another one of those guys, who can give you another option there. But I also don't know that you want to completely veer off course here. You've got Peyton Watson, you've got Christian Brown, you got a couple of young guys. Like, these are ostensibly the guys who are going to have to step up for KCP if you do lose him in free agency, which would really put you behind the 8 ball there. But if the idea was we're not going to sign veterans going into this year because we want these guys to develop, then I think you do stick to that plan and you still try to elevate those guys and develop internally, because that's been the plan all along. And so I think that's what you have to do, unless you make a more dramatic change in terms of a trade with one of those high priced guys. Then you can kind of rejigger the rotation, the whole thing a little bit more. But for now, I think you basically just do the same thing and just hope that instead of DeAndre Jordan, whoever you get this time hits, and instead of a Holiday, whoever you get this time hits a little bit more.
It's just hard because the reputation Malone had for not playing young guys, it felt like maybe we had moved past that when he slots Christian Brown into the playoff rotation last year, and it works. And then this year, it kind of reverts right back. This is the guy once upon a time who got fired from the Kings when he was like above 500, because he just has this clash of vision with the front office, with ownership, with whatever. Now, Sacramento, I'm not going to give them the benefit of the doubt the same way that I would Denver, but he has to figure out which of these guys he can trust, because at the end of the day, you can find backup centers, and they do need that because they don't even have a young guy option there. I think we know now Zeke Naji, it's just not going to happen. Right. Whereas those other positions they do. But getting rid of those guys to go chase some minimum signing on the open market, the upside of that is lower. You got to figure out, can Hunter Tyson, who we barely saw, can Jalen Pickett, who we barely saw, can these other guys take a step forward? He just stopped playing Peyton Watson in the playoffs. When you get to a game 7, it's understandable, but to not even ever try it in this Minnesota series for any extended stretch, it's just like, you can't really be doing that, because those are your guys, for better or worse. You don't have other options here. So, but we're on exactly the same page. Backup big is huge. Jokic off the court in the playoffs, 2 stats fell off a cliff: offensive rebounding and defensive foul rate. So those both go to, they didn't have the size and the defensive kind of backbone that they needed. And I think truly facing Minnesota, a big team, if you think back to what their second unit was last year when they didn't have Jokic on the court, obviously Gordon was still their center. They had Green as another kind of bigger dude, but really what kept them afloat was having both Browns out there. Murray would be out there, Gordon would be out there, and Green would be out there, and they would just switch everything.
Yeah.
You can't really do that against Minnesota, and there's going to be more teams like that. I don't think if they had played Dallas, that would have really worked. And so maybe that was a one-season trick, and you have to be a little more traditional, and the league is actually changing back to what you are, but you only have one of the guys in Jokic that gives you that identity. You have to have it across 48 minutes. So that's luckily not the hardest thing to find, but there will be a demand there. Like, the Suns need that. I know plenty of teams every summer are hunting for those guys. But you mentioned big trades here, and I think what people are thinking about, if they were to do something big, if the salary situation forced them to, is Michael Porter Jr. I will say, Wes, I think Porter Jr. is overpaid in a vacuum. I think this idea of where he could go, you're not getting untapped potential for MPJ. I don't think it's there. I think he is what he is.
Yep.
But at the same time, I do think he could be more valuable elsewhere, if that makes sense. Where what he does, just being a volume shooter, if that's all you're getting, and a vet and a positional defender, some younger building teams maybe could see that as worth something in a way that Denver could afford to take a step back in, if that makes sense. Like, I thought of Detroit. I think you have some ideas as well. Like Marcus Sasser, who was kind of a fun little six-man scoring guy for the Pistons this year, and like Isaiah Stewart. Could you just turn them into two pieces who maybe fit with what you want to be and provide some depth in different areas? And the Pistons could say, hey, yeah, it's not maybe worth $26 million or $30 million or whatever, but what are we going to spend our money on? Tobias Harris? Yeah, let him space the floor for Cade, and we'll see how that goes. So I would be looking for a team like that. I think there could be a trade out there, but again, I'm not trying to do it if I'm the Nuggets.
Michael Porter Jr. is a good player. He's not worth $35 million. And in this new CBA with a second tax apron and the limitations with it, which was not the CBA that this team was built under, you might have to make some changes. It's really hard to afford what you might Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, who's going to be up for an extension soon, Michael Porter Jr. at $35 million, and if you want to bring back KCP at whatever he's going to be making, $20 million a year, whatever we think it's going to end up being market value-wise. And I do think that Michael Porter Jr. is the harder player in a vacuum to find, but KCP is more important to Denver, and especially if you're getting him at $15 million less annually than what MPJ is worth, because that's the other part too, is there's a cost-benefit analysis to this, and I don't think that Michael Porter Jr. has been worth $35 million to Denver. And when they signed him to that, they probably did think he had a little bit higher a ceiling than what it turned out that he has. And by the way, quietly, not a very good playoff performer, and that's what it's all about for Denver.
Just a very dependent player, right? So teams can turn off the faucet.
Can you move him and his $35 million and turn that into 2 or 3 players who, and maybe even save you a little bit of money that frees up some of this cap space to go make some other moves? And I think there's something to be said about being better for it. And then to your point too, you're no longer the hunted, you're the hunter. And those two teams that you talked about that you could have matchup problems against, Dallas and Minnesota, those are the teams in the Western Conference Finals. Those are the teams that if you're Denver, you have to hunt. So you have to approach this offseason a little bit different and saying, like, what do we need to beat these teams? Because these teams got further than we did, and one of them beat us head-to-head. So I like the Detroit idea. I like the idea of going and getting a guy like Isaiah Stewart. Like, that to me does make sense. It's sort of funny. We thought, like, early in the Denver build, they had to split up Nurkic and Jokic because the two centers didn't work. Well, now Jokic is a completely different player than at that point than he was, obviously. He has a three-point shot. You could play him next to another center, and it could feasibly work. I don't know that I would go to that full time because then there's spacing issues between Jokic, another center, and Aaron Gordon. But I would at least like to have the optionality. And I don't know that just finding a guy on the minimum gives you that optionality, right? Like, it's one thing to go get Andre Drummond, but you don't want him playing next to Jokic necessarily. So I have 3
And Jokic said that, right, about Minnesota. Right. He said they can be big or small, and that really challenged us. So he's speaking truth to all of this as well. I think that lack of versatility really hurt them.
I've got 3 trade ideas. 2 of them to young teams, like you mentioned. One of them to a not young team. Cool. All right, so Michael Porter Jr. to Orlando for Jalen Suggs and Joe Ingles. I kind of love the idea of Suggs in Denver. Ingles would be a nice
Suggs in Denver would be great. I think you could make the case Suggs is more valuable already. That's the problem.
I think so. That was kind of where I landed on it, but MPJ in Orlando makes a lot of sense also. Like, that kind of is exactly what, if they would be willing to move off of Jalen Suggs. Keep them huge while also adding shooting that they need. At least call them about it. Memphis for Marcus Smart, Conchar, and Gigi Jackson. Kind of get 3 rotation pieces.
Gigi Jackson, he would just become an all-star with the Nuggets, and we would all rip our hair out. I love MPJ in Memphis. That's a really good fit. I think that's awesome. They've needed any kind of volume shooter, and then of course they get it in Desmond Bane. Then he has to play a whole season on the ball because Ja gets hurt. So one more guy to space who's, again, I feel like his defense is you can survive it, and especially if you're not having to have a defense that plays the way that Denver's does with Jokic always stretched out and MPJ having to be the low man. He could just kind of take up space. I think you could do a lot worse.
This is gonna sound like almost a diss, but like MPJ's really good at waving his arms around. Like
he's good at being 6'10", right?
Exactly. Like, he waves his arms like a butterfly, and you're just like, that's what we need you to do. That's great. I like the idea of also having somebody like Marcus Smart in Denver. It's a similar thing to Jalen Suggs, where you can kind of go big and you can go small, right? Like Marcus Smart or Jalen Suggs, either one of them could play next to Jamal Murray and Contavious Caldwell-Pope. You can go a little bit smaller if you wanted to in those alignments as well.
Bruce Brown, right? Same thing.
Exactly. My final one, Michael Porter Jr. to the New York Knicks for Bojan Bogdanovic and Mitchell Robinson.
Ooh, I do like the Mitchell Robinson concept, even though he would inevitably, miss some time. But that's a good one. MPJ Tibbs guy?
Nope. But Tibbs doesn't call the shots there.
There's the hang-up. True.
Neither is Bogdanovic, evidently, so it doesn't matter.
We'll see how Tibbs' contract extension talks go, which is a great transition over to the Knicks. I have one last thought before we get there, though, which is if Christian Braun can demonstrate that his three-point shooting progress from the first regular season he was in the NBA till this past one is real and not fall off a cliff as a shooter in the postseason each year, a lot of this stuff changes because he could be a KCP replacement. He could even be part of a replacement option for MPJ if he can make shots, but he shot 22% last year in the playoffs, 20% this year. That's not going to be good enough when you're sharing the court with Gordon and Jokic and everything else. Obviously, the Peyton Watson offensive development would be massive too, but just got to be about who they trust and what else they can do. All right, let's go to the Knicks.